For generations, the United States and Canada shared more than just a border. They shared a thriving economic partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared vision for prosperity. Their economies grew together, their industries intertwined, and their people benefited from the seamless flow of goods and ideas. Goods and services flowed freely, creating millions of jobs and deeply integrated supply chains, especially in the auto industry. From Detroit to Ontario, factories depended on parts crossing the border multiple times before a car was finished. This cross-border cooperation fueled innovation and growth, making North America a global economic powerhouse. This seamless cooperation was a model for the world, a partnership that seemed unbreakable. Decades of agreements like NAFTA reinforced the idea that collaboration, not conflict, was the path forward. But everything changed with the arrival of the Trump administration and its America First agenda. Suddenly, allies were recast as adversaries, and the tone of cross-border relations shifted overnight. Canada, once a trusted friend, was now accused of taking advantage of the US. The first shots in this trade war came as tariffs, taxes on imported goods, targeting Canadian steel and aluminum. These measures sent a clear message. The old rules were being rewritten. The justification? National security. The idea that Canada, a key military ally and partner in global defense, posed a threat was met with disbelief and even outrage on both sides of the border. This marked a dramatic shift in US trade policy, sending shockwaves through both countries. The foundation of North American prosperity was cracking, and uncertainty began to ripple through boardrooms and households alike. Tariffs weren't just economic, they were a political statement. The old rules no longer applied, and the sense of stability that businesses, workers, and citizens relied on was suddenly gone. People on both sides of the border faced growing uncertainty about their futures. The era of friendly trade was giving way to confrontation. A relationship built over decades was unraveling in a matter of months, leaving many to wonder if it could ever be repaired. The future of this historic alliance was suddenly in doubt. The continent braced for what would come next, as leaders, businesses, and families waited anxiously for signs of resolution or further escalation. To justify the sweeping tariffs, President Trump's administration claimed that foreign steel and aluminum were flooding the US market, posing a direct threat to national security. They argued that if America lost its ability to produce these critical materials, it would be dangerously dependent on other countries in times of crisis. According to officials, without strong domestic steel and aluminum industries, America couldn't defend itself or maintain its military readiness. The message was clear. National security depended on keeping these industries alive. But in reality, most imports came from close allies. Canada was the largest supplier of both steel and aluminum to the US, not adversaries. The idea that Canadian steel threatened US security seemed far-fetched to many, even within Congress and among trade experts. Critics argued that the national security justification was really a legal loophole, used to impose tariffs that would otherwise violate international trade rules and agreements. The administration also painted Canada as an unfair trading partner, pointing to trade deficits and selective policies, even though trade between the two countries was largely balanced. This narrative rallied support among voters frustrated by globalization and job losses, even as economists and industry experts challenged its accuracy and warned of unintended consequences. What was left out of the story? The deep integration of the two economies, and the fact that many American businesses relied on Canadian materials to keep their factories running and workers employed. The administration's story was one-sided, focusing on grievances and ignoring the mutual benefits and long-standing partnership between the two nations. By framing the issue as one of national security and unfairness, the White House pressed forward, despite repeated warnings from economists, business leaders, and even some allies. The stage was set for a trade war, with real economic risks looming for workers, businesses, and communities across North America. The rhetoric was powerful and persuasive, but the facts told a much more complicated and nuanced story. The consequences of these decisions would soon become clear, affecting not just industries, but everyday lives across the continent. The administration claimed a massive US trade deficit with Canada, an assertion that quickly became a central talking point in heated debates about North American trade policy. Sometimes, officials and media outlets cited figures as high as $100 billion, painting a picture of a lopsided relationship that supposedly put American workers and businesses at a disadvantage. But when you look at the official data, A very different story emerges. In reality, the US actually had a trade surplus with Canada in goods and services, not a deficit. The deficit narrative simply didn't match reality. Fact checkers and economists repeatedly pointed out the discrepancy, but the myth persisted in public discourse. Tariffs on steel and aluminum were justified as protection from cheap imports, but the data showed Canada wasn't dumping metal or flooding the US market with underpriced goods. In fact, North American industries were highly integrated. Canadian aluminum was essential for American cars, planes, and even beer cans. The supply chain stretched across the border, supporting jobs and innovation on both sides. Tariffs raised costs for both Canadian producers and American manufacturers, squeezing profit margins and forcing some companies to slow production or lay off workers. The auto industry was especially vulnerable. Car parts often crossed the border multiple times before final assembly, making tariffs a direct threat to efficiency and competitiveness. New tariffs threatened to disrupt this carefully balanced system, raising prices for consumers, risking jobs, and creating uncertainty for businesses that relied on predictable trade flows. The numbers showed Canada wasn't an unfair partner. The trade balance was roughly even, sometimes even tilting in favor of the US, depending on the year and sector. Key industries were partners, not competitors. Collaboration, not conflict, had long been the foundation of prosperity for both nations. The administration's justification was built on misleading claims, often ignoring the facts presented by their own trade experts and advisors. Ignoring the real data, the White House pursued a policy that hurt both countries, leading to factory closures, protests, and growing frustration among workers and business owners. What was once a win-win partnership was now turning into a lose-lose conflict, with both economies suffering the consequences of a story told in data, not dollars. Beyond metals and cars, dairy and lumber became flashpoints in the trade dispute. President Trump attacked Canada's dairy system, calling its tariffs unfair. But Canada's supply management protected small farmers from price swings, and the highest tariffs only applied above certain quotas. The US still exported significant dairy to Canada under lower tariffs. Both countries had their own agricultural protections, but the administration's rhetoric ignored this complexity. The softwood lumber dispute was another long-standing issue. The US accused Canada of subsidizing lumber and imposed tariffs, raising the cost of building homes in America. The National Association of Home Builders estimated these tariffs added thousands to the price of a typical home. The administration's narrative highlighted Canadian barriers, but downplayed American ones. The real losers were American consumers and industries facing higher costs. These disputes were complex, not simple cases of unfairness. The confrontational approach made them worse, prolonging uncertainty for businesses. Political wins took priority over practical solutions. Canada didn't back down. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced retaliatory tariffs on American goods, a dollar-for-dollar response. The Canadian government targeted products from key political districts, including bourbon, orange juice, cheese, and ketchup. The message: if the US inflicted pain, Canada would make sure influential lawmakers felt it at home. This was a calculated move to pressure Washington. Canadian officials wanted American lawmakers to hear from their own constituents, farmers, workers, and business owners losing access to Canada's market. The tit-for-tat exchange escalated the trade war. American businesses were now hit from both sides. Higher costs for materials and lost sales in Canada. The conflict was no longer abstract policy, it was real, with tangible effects on jobs and communities. The friendly neighbor had become a formidable opponent. The trade war was now a full-blown economic battle. The stakes were rising for both countries. The cost of confrontation was mounting. The hope for a quick resolution faded. The damage was spreading fast. The American business community reacted swiftly and negatively. Leaders from major manufacturers to small firms warned that a trade war with Canada would be disastrous. Companies like Ford and General Motors said tariffs would add hundreds of millions to their costs, leading to higher prices or job cuts. Even Harley-Davidson announced it would move some production overseas to avoid retaliatory tariffs. Small businesses were hit too. Material costs soared and export orders dried up. Business owners felt trapped. The tariffs hurt their bottom line and threatened jobs. The backlash revealed a disconnect between policy and economic reality. The unified voice of business signaled the tariff gamble was backfiring. The trade war sparked a political firestorm in Washington. Many Republican lawmakers, especially from agricultural and manufacturing states, grew alarmed as constituents suffered. Bipartisan senators pushed to limit the president's tariff authority, arguing Congress should have a say. Critics warned the tariffs were alienating allies and hurting the economy. Supporters insisted short-term pain would lead to better deals, but many saw only chaos and harm. The Republican unity on trade was shattered. Political pressure and business outcry made the policy seem unsustainable. The conflict with Canada became a source of deep division at home. The trade war's consequences rippled through the U.S. economy, hitting ordinary Americans. Tariffs made steel and aluminum more expensive, raising prices on everything from cars to soup. Companies faced higher costs, passed on to consumers as a higher cost of living. Job losses outnumbered gains, as industries reliant on imported materials struggled. The promised manufacturing boom never arrived. Uncertainty chilled business investment. Companies delayed hiring and expansion. America's global reputation suffered as allies questioned U.S. reliability. International trade rules were weakened, replaced by power politics. The world moved closer to chaos than cooperation. Even after tariffs were lifted and the USMCA replaced NAFTA, the scars of the trade war remained. Trust between the US and Canada was deeply damaged. Canadians felt betrayed by an ally who labeled them a security threat. Businesses on both sides rethought their supply chains, seeking to reduce cross-border dependence. The seamless integration that once defined North American industry was weakened. Higher prices and lost jobs lingered for ordinary people. The easy friendship was replaced by caution and wariness. The Trump administration's tariff gamble failed to deliver its promises. Instead, it fractured political unity, hurt businesses, and alienated a crucial ally. The trade war with Canada is a lesson. Relationships built over generations can be damaged quickly by confrontation. In a connected world, there are no easy wins in a trade war, only shared losses.